The studio lights dimmed, and the audience grew quiet as a middle-aged Filipino man walked slowly onto the stage. He wore a classic black suit, shiny but simple, and held an old silver microphone as if it were the most precious thing he owned. His name was Rico Santos, and when the host asked him what he'd be doing today, he said softly, "I'll be singing an Elvis Presley song." The crowd reacted with a mix of curiosity and laughter. Elvis impersonations had been done countless times before, and most ended up feeling more like comedy than tribute. But there was something different about Rico's calmness, something in his eyes that said this meant more than just a performance. The judges looked intrigued but skeptical, especially Simon, who leaned forward, studying Rico's expression. When the music began, a hush spread across the entire hall. Rico's voice broke through the silence with the opening line of "Can't Help Falling in Love." It wasn't just mimicry. His tone carried warmth, nostalgia, and a strange familiarity that sent chills through the crowd. He sang with tenderness, his voice deep and smooth like velvet, echoing the emotion that Elvis once shared with the world. The camera zoomed in on Simon, who blinked slowly, as if trying to process what he was hearing. Each note carried something pure, like a message sent across time. Rico's eyes glistened under the stage lights as he reached the chorus, his voice trembling just slightly. When he finished, the theater was silent for a moment before exploding into applause. Some in the crowd stood, others wiped away tears. Simon didn't move. He just stared at Rico, his mouth open but no words coming out. Finally, after a few seconds, he whispered, "That was something special." Rico smiled humbly and bowed, clearly overwhelmed by the reaction. For the first time in a long while, the AGT stage felt sacred, like it had witnessed something truly soulful. The following day, the video of Rico's audition went viral. Millions of people across the world shared it, calling him the Filipino Elvis. Fans commented about how his voice carried both the strength of Elvis and the softness of a man who had lived through pain. When AGT invited him back for an interview, Rico appeared shy but genuine. He told the story that touched everyone's hearts. Growing up in a small town in the Philippines, his father used to play Elvis songs on a cracked radio they could barely afford. The music filled their tiny home and became the soundtrack of his childhood. "My father always told me," Rico said with a soft smile, "Son, one day the world will hear you sing." But his father passed away before that day could come. Rico paused for a moment, his voice breaking. "Now when I sing Elvis songs, I feel like he's beside me." The producers decided to air his story before his next performance. When the episode aired, the entire nation watched as the screen faded from Rico's tearful confession to his performance on stage. This time, he sang, "Love Me Tender." The moment the first notes rang out, the room felt heavier, almost spiritual. His voice carried a sense of longing that transcended imitation. It was as if he was singing directly to his father. The audience held their breath through the entire song, and when he finished, not a single person remained seated. Simon looked visibly moved, whispering to Howie, "That's not just talent. That's soul." Rico bowed again, tears streaming down his face, while the crowd cheered louder than ever. His performance wasn't just about Elvis anymore, it was about love, loss, and the power of music to heal. That night, AGT wasn't just a talent show, it became a stage for something deeper, something human. And Simon Cowell, the man known for his words, was once again left speechless. By the time Rico Santos returned to the stage for his next appearance, his life had already changed. His audition had racked up millions of views online, and his name had become a symbol of hope for countless people across the world. When he stepped out for his second live performance, there was a noticeable shift in the atmosphere. The audience didn't see him as just another contestant anymore, they saw him as a man who had turned pain into music. The lights dimmed, and the crowd fell completely silent. Rico took a deep breath, placed his hand over his heart, and said softly into the mic, "This one is for everyone who still believes in their dreams." The gentle opening chords of "If I Can Dream" filled the theater. His voice came through strong and heartfelt, each note echoing the emotion of Elvis's message of hope and unity. The song built slowly, his tone rising with conviction. As he sang, images of his father, his home in the Philippines, and the long journey that brought him to this very moment flashed in his mind. When he hit the final verse, his eyes filled with tears, but his voice never wavered. The camera panned across the judges, Howie with his hand over his heart, Sophia watching wide-eyed, and Heidi smiling through tears. Simon leaned forward, both hands pressed together under his chin, completely captivated. As the final note echoed through the room, a deep silence took over. No one wanted to break the spell. Then, suddenly, the crowd erupted into applause, rising to their feet. Rico looked overwhelmed, tears streaming down his cheeks. Simon slowly stood up and walked toward the golden buzzer. He stared at Rico for a long moment, his eyes misty, before pressing it. The golden confetti burst into the air, showering Rico as he fell to his knees, crying uncontrollably. The crowd roared as Simon walked onto the stage, shaking his head in disbelief. That, he said, his voice cracking slightly, was one of the greatest performances I've ever seen in my life. Rico looked up, unable to speak, clutching his chest as if to hold in the emotion. It wasn't just a victory, it was a dream fulfilled. The confetti sparkled under the stage lights, reflecting the moment that would forever change his life. The next morning, news outlets across the world carried headlines about the Filipino singer who made Simon Cowell cry. In that instant, Rico Santos wasn't just a performer, he had become a global symbol of love, faith, and perseverance. The fame came quickly after that. In episode 4, Rico's story continued to touch hearts as he woke up to a flood of messages from around the world. There were interviews waiting, TV appearances lined up, and fan letters from people who said his voice gave them courage to chase their own dreams. Filipino communities in the US, Canada, and back home in the Philippines celebrated him as a national hero. Even with all the attention, Rico stayed humble. He spent time with the AGT crew, thanking each one personally. Backstage, Simon approached him again, offering something rare, sincere admiration. "You didn't just sing an Elvis song," Simon said softly. "You brought him back to life, and you did it with heart." Rico smiled shyly and replied, "I just wanted to make my father proud." The two shook hands, and for a moment, it felt like the show itself had stopped just to honor that exchange. That same week, Rico was invited to perform on The Tonight Show, where he gave a fresh, modern twist to Suspicious Minds. His stage presence had evolved, more confident, more relaxed, but the humility in his eyes was still there. The audience loved him instantly, and clips from the show went viral once again. People began calling him the Filipino Elvis, not as a copy, but as someone who carried the same soul and charisma that made Elvis timeless. Back on AGT, the judges called him one of the most unforgettable acts in the show's history. Simon summed it up perfectly: "Every once in a while, someone comes along who reminds us what music really means, and that someone is you." Rico stood there, smiling through tears, knowing his father would have been proud beyond words. His journey had become bigger than the competition. It had become a movement of emotion, culture, and love that reached across borders, connecting hearts everywhere. As the semi-finals arrived, Rico Santos felt the pressure like never before. The stage lights, the cameras, and the thousands of eyes watching him from all corners of the world felt heavier than they ever had. He stood backstage, his hands trembling slightly, clutching a small pendant that once belonged to his father. This time, he wasn't just singing to impress the judges, he was singing to honor a memory. When the host called his name, Rico took a deep breath and stepped into the spotlight. The crowd erupted with cheers, waving signs that read, "The Filipino Elvis," and "Sing for your father." The room fell silent again as the music started. It was "My Way," the song that had meant everything to his father, and Rico chose to perform it in a stripped-down acoustic version with just a piano behind him. His voice began softly, fragile but rich with emotion. Each word felt like a confession. He wasn't trying to sound like Elvis this time, he was being himself. The vulnerability in his tone carried through every note, reaching straight into the hearts of everyone listening. As he sang, clips of his earlier performances played on the giant screen behind him, his first audition, his golden buzzer moment, and the tears he shed on stage. The connection between his journey and the song was undeniable. When he reached the iconic line, "I did it my way," his voice cracked slightly, and the audience collectively held its breath. He closed his eyes, letting the final note linger until it melted into silence. For a long moment, no one moved. Then, the entire room erupted in a standing ovation. People were crying, shouting his name, clapping until their hands hurt. The judges stood too, clapping in awe. Simon took a deep breath, visibly emotional, and said, "Rico, I've judged thousands of singers in my life, but I've never seen anyone sing with this much heart. That wasn't just a song. That was your soul on stage." Howie nodded in agreement, calling it a masterclass in emotion. Sophia and Heidi couldn't stop praising him either. Rico smiled shyly and whispered a thank you, his eyes glistening with tears. When the votes were announced, he advanced to the grand finale, and the crowd roared with approval. That night, as he left the stage, he looked up at the sky and said softly, "That was for you, Papa." The finale arrived faster than he could have imagined. The pressure was enormous, but Rico had learned to channel it into strength. He knew this was his last chance to show the world who he truly was. When the lights dimmed for the final time, the room filled with quiet anticipation. A single spotlight shone down on him as he stood center stage, surrounded by soft golden light. He began with, "Can't Help Falling in Love," the song that had started it all. His voice was deeper, richer now, filled with gratitude and love. Then, as the tempo changed, the band joined in for Jailhouse Rock, bringing the crowd to its feet. Rico moved with confidence and energy, smiling and engaging the audience like a seasoned performer. Finally, the music slowed again for his closing song, Unchained Melody. The stage turned blue and silver, and as he sang, the atmosphere became almost spiritual. His voice carried emotion that went beyond words, part farewell, part celebration. When he finished, the room exploded with applause. Simon stood slowly, his expression soft and proud. "Rico," he said, "you didn't just honor Elvis tonight, you created your own legend." The crowd chanted his name, tears streaming down many faces. Moments later, the results were announced. Rico Santos was crowned the winner of America's Got Talent. Confetti filled the air once again, golden and glowing, as Rico dropped to his knees, overwhelmed with joy and disbelief. Simon walked up, hugged him, and whispered, "You did it your way." That moment became one of the most emotional finales in AGT history. News headlines across the world celebrated the Filipino singer who brought Elvis back to life and made Simon Cowell speechless. Rico's story became a symbol of perseverance and love, a reminder that music has no borders, and dreams can come true no matter where you come from. As he left the stage that night, Rico looked out at the audience one last time and whispered to himself, "This is for you, Papa. We did it." The crowd's cheers followed him into the night, sealing his place forever in AGT history.